everybody. Today I wanted to share with you my game against Sultan Jr. online on Lichess. Apparently he's an international master, rated at 2615 online. I don't know his real name, but he apparently has a FIDE rating of 2378. And I wanted to share my game with you today. So I'm white pieces, and I started out with my usual pawn to e4, and he responds with g6, representing a modern. Doesn't have to be a modern. It can oftentimes transpose to other positions like Sicilian defense, which actually it does in this game, Pirt's defense. My response to this is knight c3, with the hopes of transposing to, like I said, the Sicilian defense, although pretty standard is d4. Knight c3 I like. He responds bishop g7, and then I play g3 and fianchetto. And now he announces c5. So just by a nuance in move order, I'm able to transpose to Sicilian waters, which I'm certainly more familiar with, probably more than likely more familiar than my opponent. Natural development, bishop e3, with the idea of probably setting up this battery, queen d2, and perhaps potentially trading the bishop on h6 at some point. If the black king castles that side, we can exploit some of the weakened squares around the black king. Rook b8. Black has a couple choices, all of which I'm pretty well prepared for. One of the main lines is knight f6, natural development threatening to potentially put the king on the king, castling on the king side. And he can also bring the knight to g4. It's defended by the bishop, and he can start going for our bishop pair. So many times what happens after knight f6, I'll play h3 just to prevent black from achieving that. The other option black can play here is e6. I have a really, really good record against this line. Many times I'll just proceed with creating my battery on the dark squares, queen d2. And when he plays knight e7, I can play bishop h6, going for the plan of weakening squares around the king if he castles kingside. But he also chooses another alternative, which is playable. And this was rook b8, with a pretty clear-cut strategic plan. He wants to play b5 and b4, gain time on the knight. He's also grabbing significant space on the queen side, while also, enhancing the diagonal, the long diagonal for the dark squared bishop. So queen d2, b5, knight e2, preparing to castle kingside. Notice here also that because my plan is to try to trade bishops on h6, black delays the development of his knight on g8 for as long as he can. But meanwhile, he's continuing to grab space on the queen side. So b4 seems consistent. And also the other idea of playing queen d2 is to open up the d1 square for the knight. The knight here looks pretty ugly, at least at first glance, but it does serve some purpose. Obviously, it guards the b2 square from the bishop. And I'm not terribly concerned because I know in the future if we can eventually achieve bishop h6, at some point black can no longer delay the development of the g8 knight. This will make the e3 square available for our knight, where it can influence squares like d5, f5, c4, and maybe even some instance g4, and it can contribute to a potential kingside attack. Knight f6, again, so now he finally develops this knight. He can't wait any longer. He's now going to castle kingside, I would think. But again, there is this threat of going for the bishop pair with knight g4. So I really can't allow this. So my next response was natural h3. He castles. And also I safeguard my king with castles. a5. And now bishop h6. Now, one can argue that the trading of bishops dark squared bishops may not be as useful with the pawn on e7. It might be a little bit better to exploit the dark squares around the black king when the pawn is on e6 or maybe even e5. But here, I feel I have to do it anyway, trading bishops and then trying to find a better square for this knight. And then, like I said, influencing squares like f5 and d5, or maybe even pushing with d4 in the center. So I think bishop h6 is pretty consistent. He takes, queen recaptures, and now knight d4. A couple options I had in mind. I thought of maybe knight c1, avoiding the trade of minor pieces and maybe playing c3. But in this case, I just decided to bring the queen back to d2. And here I thought he might follow up with a natural move like e5, putting his pawn in the center. But instead he takes here, which I don't think is bad. Queen goes to e2. Ideally, I'd like to have it along this diagonal, so I can understand the logic in my opponent's play. I would think that at some point, if I'm going to create something on the dark squares, I'll have to get this queen back to d2 or e3. He proceeds with bishop a6, and then maybe even potentially entertaining ideas like c4. I had a choice here of maybe going for b3, stymieing any options of playing c4 in the future. I can also potentially put the knight on b2 and c4, so it's a multi-purpose move. But I wanted to stick with my initial intention of maybe getting the knight to e3, as I mentioned before, so knight e3 seems to be the natural follow-up in my mind. Knight e8. And this move I've actually seen before. I've played games with similar patterns. And I do believe that knight e8, maybe not in this exact same position, was played over the board. And the idea is knight e8, knight c7, knight b5, and maybe even knight d4. It's a rather long-winded sequence that's going to take another 3 more moves. While at the same time, I felt that I could improve my chances for an attack on the king's side. So I didn't mind knight e8, f4, knight c7, f5, knight b5. I don't really have a way to stop knight d4 at this point. What I thought queen g4 would be useful. Knight d4, well-centralized knight attacking potentially the pawn on c2. So this knight is kind of tied to the defense of the pawn in the meantime. But I do have a way to at least force this knight to make a decision by playing c3. I decided to just improve this rook and maybe double up on the f-file and continue with my plans to create a kingside attack. e6, probably the first dubious move of the game, or questionable move of the game. Since this was a fast time control, I had to come up with some quick decisions. I had to either consider f6, which was on my mind, but my main candidate move was just doubling up. In retrospect, I think f6 and really just clamping black on the king side and potentially maybe bring my queen from g5 to h6 with a lot of different mate ideas, f4, h4, I think probably would have been even better. But I chose to wait a little longer and just double up. Seems very natural. Takes. I recapture. This I didn't mind because now the bishop actually plays and can become an active participant on the attack. Maybe going to squares like d5 or e4 to attack the black king. Black plays bishop c8, which pins this pawn to the queen. So I can't really entertain options like f takes g6 yet. So I answer c3, just to try to get black to announce where he wants to go with this knight. Knight doesn't really have this square because of the bishop. Knight b5 is certainly a safe square to retreat to, but the knight seems really distant from the defense of the black king. Right now, he has the queen kind of guarding these squares. And then you have the rook here protecting these squares, maybe even rook b7 to defend the king laterally. But I feel this knight is going to be misplaced once it's moved. So c3. In retrospect, though, I think knight d5 is probably even stronger. Knight d5 raising possible threats of checks on e7 or f6 in the future. I still have the move c3 anyway, so the future of the knight on d4 is questionable. But I think just improving this knight on d5 right away and taking advantage of that opportunity may have been more accurate. But I played c3 anyway. We capture, and then he plays probably the biggest mistake of the game, queen e8, thinking he's just going to exchange knight for my knight on e3. But he fails to miss this tactical sequence, knight d5. Not only do we retain the option of taking this knight, but now we raise the even stronger possibility of skewering the king and queen. After some deliberation, my opponent resigned here. So it really boiled down to a one-move tactic at the end, but I was pretty proud with how I handled this game from start to finish. I didn't really feel that I was in any danger, and I felt I was in control. I was in my element. I was more familiar with the positions. And even against a much stronger rated opposition, a titled player even, I was able to take the fight to him and win out. So hopefully you guys found that instructive. I was pretty proud of this. Hopefully I'll come up with more videos in the future. Thanks.